Hello, my lovies. So this is Christina with Karma's Eye Psychic LLC with Universal Spirit Podcast, and we are wrapping up our paranormal series. So our last subject on the list is psychic investigators, just as promised. So we are going to discuss what psychic investigators are. Who uses them, their accuracy, and the level of skepticism throughout their practices, and where you can really find a psychic investigator, and also some YouTube links as well that will probably be posted in the link of this episode. I could almost assume you would be in for a little bit of a treat with this episode. People are very skeptical and very intrigued by psychic investigators. First of all, you have a world of people who, dive and dip back and forth between whether they even believe in psychics to begin with, okay? And that's just on a regular level of their own private practices and just universally across the board with how society has slowly evolved to the understanding a psychic and their abilities, and of course their accuracy. You would get a lot of switch and bait with yes, they are definitely very accurate and everything like that, and then you got others saying, oh, I don't believe in that stuff, and then there's so many questions, and then there's so much doubt, and you get a lot of resistance on the other side. So when it comes to people resorting to a psychic investigator, it has a lot to do with really not being able to find any answers, which involves law enforcement, FBI, criminal areas of justice system, and etc. You would most often hire a psychic investigator when it came to either not being unable to capture like a homicide, murderer, homicide case, or trying to find or locate a missing persons, to even verify their whereabouts, or even to verify if they're still alive. That has been a very wide open practice with psychic investigators for missing persons. People would just like to have closure to whether or not they are still alive. And also for those who are deceased, they have had psychic investigators find the remains of lost people, or just missing persons in a lot of cold cases. And also what makes this fascinating is that it's been on the rise in social media, people becoming a lot more interested in criminal cases and criminal TV, and media, and just entertainment in general. However, people have found a lot of validity and accuracy to how these cases portray themselves in real life. The use of real and accurate legal terms and laws that you can in fact research on your own, being brought to the mainstream media for people to really engage in and get educated. And of course it is in fact entertainment. However, psychic investigators are used in real cases. So we have been exposed as a culture to real crime and entertainment crime which is not so different from things that have actually transpired. Right. So in these cases, psychic investigators are considered in homicide crimes when they cannot catch the killer, when the killer is unknown, and there's just a random, victim. And also, like I mentioned before, with missing persons, to verify whether or not, if they are still alive, and verify their whereabouts. So one of the, most popular things that a psychic investigator, will be called in to do is to look at a photograph of the actual victim. They will also ask close relatives or any associates of the victim for any of their personal objects, such as clothing, their favorite lighter, or something that was very close to the victim if there is no photograph. But in most cases, there are photographs involved. So people are wondering exactly what you call this, and believe it or not, there's actually a scientific term for this type of ability, and so it's called psychometry. Psychometry is the supposed ability to discover facts about an event or person by touching intimate objects associated with them. This ability is associated with a scientific word called psychometrics. That's the science of measuring mental capacities and processes. So it would be mostly the best way that scientists and skeptics could in fact measure the actual abilities of psychics being able to either foresee the past, the future, and be able to run these things through their head, see them accurately, which involves one of their personal effects, such as a photograph or, their clothing, to basically ingest the energy as if they were the person, as if they were the victim themselves. And this transfer of energy, believing that energy is alive, right? And energy is in everything that we touch. We make an impression on anything. And these very, very sensitive, psychometrists, psychometric psychics are able to, in fact, have very clear vision and accurate abilities to proceed forward, and which measures to take to find and finally solve the actual case. No, there's people out there who are wondering, have they ever brought in like a phony or a fake psychic before and had them thrown off the case, or possibly have led them in the wrong direction? The answer is yes. Okay, those were always the fake psychics. They were never real to begin with. You do not have the gift, you cannot do the job. So that is just true all across the board, and psychics are no exception. Do people usually get scammed, and do they get fooled by people who claim to be spirit workers, and then they get themselves involved in a case just for the money, and then they turn up with nothing? Yes, this has happened. So I just wanted to get that out of the way, because I do know skeptics are going to be listening to my podcast, and I'm not going to try to be so biased. Is it embarrassing for the community out there of, psychics and people who practice psychometry, that are actually skilled and, do well, are accurate, they practice their gift, and they actually have something to offer us as a whole? Does it make us look bad? Yes, absolutely it does. But I want to make sure that I got that out of the way to let you know, anyone who's listening, that I am very secure in all of my, spiritual family, that we know what we are doing, who you are, and thank you for being real. And yes, there are people who claim to be just like us, and they do in fact ruin it for the rest of us sometimes. But we are not going to condone the fact that there are plenty of scammers out there. Now, getting back to the real gifted psychics. After doing some extensive research, when a psychic is called on the case, like I said before, there is no other way, but people are still, trying to have hope and believe that the case can be solved. Okay. This also, denotes to not just law enforcement. I forgot to mention, this also works when it comes to hauntings as well. Psychic investigators do go into haunted houses of, where spirits are being very, very, disruptive, being very, very, negative, and, just outright, evil, and like a massively, destructive. Investigators are also called into those situations to really get the backstory of why the spirit is still here, of why the spirit is being so disruptive, why the spirit, like what the spirit is looking for, what messages that they have for us, what they're trying to communicate to us, really to get in tune with their emotions, and really mostly the backstory. However, you could be dealing with a multitude of spirits, and it's not always disruptive ones either. It is also the ones that are very depressed, sad, and just maybe have like a little bit of, some occurrences that are just really uncomfortable, eerie, and it's just time for that spirit to move on. And you do bring in a psychic investigator to see if there is something, hidden in the attic or hidden in the floorboards. It's quite possible, ghosts will lead a psychic to, a key that was, drilled into the floorboard. It's like, I just want that key and I can move on. That thing was precious to me. Or could you please go to, the store and rebuy the collection of, Fabergé eggs that I had 20 years ago, and then I'll feel at peace. Whatever it would be. There really is no job too small for a psychic investigator, whether working in law enforcement or working in a spiritual situation where the person has already passed away. There really is no job too small, because we can communicate with people who are living and non-living. There really is no one world to us. So I want to also mention that as well. I am getting a little ahead of myself, where I almost forgot to mention that. So when it comes to, psychic investigations with spirits that have passed on, and they are haunting a space, they're called in to help the spirit move on as well. You will often hear about it in regards to, poltergeists and demon possessions. And there are, movies, very famous movies that are, circulating out there in society, that involve very serious, high skilled psychic investigators. And the most famous movie for that is the movie Poltergeist. Ironically enough, in Poltergeist, even though it was a film, it is not uncommon for a space to be haunted or needing of psychic assistance. Because in the movie, there were physical remains of those people, and they were trapped in that space. So having the physical remains not put to rest or being disturbed or even being, disrespected had caused the calamity. And there have been, real life situations where there were, burial grounds that were disturbed or disrespected, or, there were things that were moved, or stolen, so to speak, and, there's things being done wrong to the deceased, and they need to rectify it. So I did do a episode last week in regards to why spirits get stuck here. So that's one of the reasons: unfinished business, energy, karma, and all that jazz. Okay, now moving back to psychic investigations when it comes to law enforcement and policing, and we've already covered, the objects and the photograph. They will also try to communicate with the closest people, of the deceased. It's not the same as like a criminal investigation or like an interrogation. The psychics really want to get a good idea of the energy and the emotions that people close to the deceased or the missing persons, are carrying with them. That is also a very key part to finding a victim, because their energy has played a part in their story before these crimes had taken place. 99% of the time, whether or not, little John did not come back home. However, his mother was present before the crime was committed. And if mom is still involved in the investigation, the psychic will in fact sit down with mom and try to read her energy as well. It is also interesting to know the fact that if you happen to be, biologically related to the victim in a psychic investigation case, a biological connection also helps the psychic, and somehow this really is an interesting phenomenon in science, and spirituality. Almost kind of really will play itself out. Tell as much as, the photograph, tell as much as the clothing, that biological connection. This is only referring to, obviously people who are related to the victim, has a lot of, spiritual ties to it. That's why you see cases of, mothers and fathers who are looking for a missing child in particular, and they keep going to the police over and over again, year after year after year, saying that I know he's still alive, I know she's still out there. That biological, twist and turning and the pulling and falling back really is a scientific phenomenon that psychics can definitely get entangled in, which actually makes the process a little bit easier for them. Sometimes it even makes the visions even clearer. So sometimes the physically closer they are to the victim's family or friends or loved ones, whoever was there at the time, really makes a very positive and very serious impact. There is, in fact, the telling the truth and not telling the truth component to it. So there have been some studies and some recorded incidences where mom and dad didn't exactly tell the whole story, even though the psychic can pick up on it. The resistance to the truth, the blocking, and the fear, or whatever caused them to hesitate, with all the pieces of the puzzle, regardless of how much faith they have in the psychic really needs literally everyone's trust, everyone's compliance, everything, like all honesty, because even when psychics are having a session with their clients in their regular business, it's very important that you have very open energy. It helps us to alleviate any blockages, even in the message that is coming to you. We can still give you an accurate reading, but the more open you are, the more honest you are with the reason why you're getting a reading and why you are what you're really seeking, makes what you are seeking come to you that much more. It opens things up so much wider, so much clearer, so much better. So it is important to also document and at least say that that psychic investigators have had incidences with people who are close to the victim, who are not suspects, however, but will still be hesitating to give information because they are, afraid of being judged or, whichever, because, psychics are not the police. And sometimes even telling the police the entire truth can be extremely difficult. And then here is the psychic, which is not really popular in, society, still, you want to tell someone who's unfavorable to society your entire truth, is not, is a psychological mindfuck, really, to be honest. Because psychics also know that they are dealing with many people, even if they're called for their assistance, are still very skeptical, right? People are very, very tied to what they can see, what they can prove, and what they can touch. And psychics do not have that limit. Now, when it comes to continuing the investigation, police, investigators play a major role after they have been given leads. They would then have to rationalize the psychic investigator's leads. So if the psychic says that, I feel as though there is something, in the woods down the street that is tied to the next place this person went, I'm just tracing their steps to where they've gone. They then have to rationalize, basically, have probable cause to then search, the area which the psychic now has pointed them in the direction. As unmainstream as it is to have her, they have to continue their investigation in the most mainstream way possible. I'm not losing any of you guys. You guys know you guys can comment on these episodes. Definitely put your input into it. Would love to know what you think about everything so far, and what you can contribute to, these facts that I have researched. Question that I know is burning on your brain is, how much is the success rate of psychic investigators to solving crimes? If you were to compare 1 out of 10 cases, what would the average number be for success? Though success is based on a lot of things rather just relying on the psychic. Sometimes success has to be like 100% compliance and, really taking seriously the lead that the psychic gives, and not all leads that the psychic gives are always investigated. Sometimes it would seem a little irrational to check in a place where they've already checked, though the psychic is trying to lead you back there. And if they don't go on that lead and do not check again, then the success rate then drops. And in other cases where the psychic is given 100% consideration for all the leads that they give, the success rate definitely goes up a lot higher. So you have to consider those things when it comes to the success rate of psychic investigations. And of course, we're talking about law enforcement in this case, right? So you also, got to consider that all law enforcement, state by state, country by country, and whoever is in charge of them, varies dramatically. Oftentimes, you will have in very conservative places where the law enforcement is very conservative and, most likely either religious based, there will be a strong effort to get psychic investigators off a case. No matter how accurate things are, there have been, a lot of tension between law enforcement and psychic investigators where they have been, in fact, thrown off cases regardless of their accurate readings. So that is something you would need to consider as well, because I do need to get to, what success rates are and how to measure them. But according to the research I have done, now mind you, I am one person who has done research, like I said, state to state, town to town, country to country. And this is like a general, average. But when it comes to, a scale from 1 to 10, the success rate of psychic investigators being involved in cases are, 6 out of 10. And in my opinion, that's actually a very high number. That's a very good number, with any consideration, because of, the low, demand for a psychic investigation, and also the cost of having them on, payroll, the force, and the family's retainer and all that jazz. 6 out of 10 across the board, I feel, is a very good number. Now, would other numbers be higher in other places? Absolutely. But I'm just talking on a worldwide scale. It's still more than 50% success rate, and I would definitely give that a bit of an applause, because it's basically all of our spiritual brothers and sisters out there putting up their time and energy, going against a lot of resistance, and doing their absolute best. Everybody's level is different. However, we're talking about the psychics that are actually gifted, and the ones that were able to stay the case for the entire length of the case. Mind you, in other places, psychic investigators are actually used more regularly, and in those places, their success rate is 90%. So I just wanted to also throw that out there too as well. So not to discourage anyone who is listening who is a skeptic, those numbers are actually a fact, and you can Google that. One random fact that I got to throw out there, because I'm barely organized, guys. There was not any documentation for psychic investigators, though they have been, used for centuries for kings and queens and, BC, AC, all kinds. Psychics have been around forever, right? But the first time that it was actually documented that psychic investigation was used for law enforcement, missing persons, and trying to locate a homicide, offender wasn't until 1845, which I found very interesting. I didn't get a lot of details on this fact, but the facts that I did get were very interesting to me, considering what was going on in this country, the United States, at the time. Found that very, very interesting to me. Anyway, guys, let's get back on track here. So now we've got the shoes, we've got the clothes, we've got the photo of the victim, right? So now the psychic investigator is moving on to the persons that is closest to the victim. So now what the psychic then will do will play out the entire crime in their head. 9 out of 10, a psychic investigator can actually see the crime, feel the crime, and the pain. Okay, describe the temperature, any type of anything that was happening to the victim. Really going over over and above 110%, if not sweating, crying, feeling the pain, and everything that was even said to the victim, if any words were exchanged from the offender. They can clearly see, weapons involved, any type of restraints. They have been known to describe vehicles very accurately, to vans, to cars, and better yet, they can describe the place of where the victim is or had been. So this could mean the woods, this could mean water, a boat, it could mean a house, okay, and where the location of, in the house or place where the victim had been held or even been left. These abilities for the psychic have been described as basically watching a movie in their head as clearly as looking at someone right in front of them to experience, these heinous crimes being committed to these victims. The psychic really is involved. They are also described as flashbacks. There have been times where psychics can actually read the person if they are still alive. They can actually see where they are, if they are still alive, just grabbing the photo and just like, I feel like I'm blindfolded right now. I'm in a cold closet. I can see a little bit of light. I was taken outside one time and this is what the house looks like. People have used psychic investigators to describe the offender. That has been one of the most intriguing things that people will do. So when it comes to doing the sketches, like who do you see? Who are you looking at? And saying, he has a beard, he has that, it's a woman, it's 2 people, it's 3 people, they're talking about this, they're talking about that, they're going to go here. There's so much, running, going on in the psychic's head. They have been able to describe the offender 100% accurately across the board of all of my research. It has said that 100% accurate when it came to describing the offender. They'll get a pen and paper, if not the psychic can draw them, or they get their own artist, and they will put those pictures out on the news, and those have been 100% accurate. Despite some, here and there, flukes or whatever, the statistics remain the same when it comes to the picture, what the psychic is seeing the person. It's also very fascinating when the psychic can pick up on more than one person. And I actually find it personally more exciting that the psychic can pick up on the conversations that are being had around the victim, because to me that tells me about living and listening energy, that your energy is not just living, it is literally like listening. Your energy can see, your energy can move. It's like literally having like another being on yourself. That really contributes to the idea that your body is not all that there is to you, that your energy basically can float around like millions and millions of stars, in little bits and pieces, still hear, still feel, still do all these things that your body can do, and still, stretch themselves as far as to where those objects are with the psychic to where the victim actually is, and whether the victim is even in the same, state or city or town or whatever, whether the person is underground or whatever. It's just so enlightening that a person's energy can speak like that, give those flashbacks and give that information, to this person who is so, spiritually and, scientifically sensitive to that. Lastly, my lovey-doveys, we're coming to the conclusion of these psychic investigation cases. Okay, so once the victim is located, whether they are, dead or alive, the accuracy of that has also stayed to 60 to 70% accurate. when once the victim is found, whether they are found with their offender, or they are found with their remains. There have been times where they believe that the psychic was 100% accurate, and yet the remains were just no longer there. Some remains have been washed away, and there have been times when psychic law enforcement has gone back to the scene, and have found later, after the psychic told them where the remains could have been, and would have had either a confession, from an offender or offenders or accomplices, that was in fact the spot. Even not finding a trace, somehow finding out the truth that the psychic was in fact right, that Susie was buried in the woods, the bones are no longer there, disintegrated or whatever, but then the confession comes out and then leads them right back to that spot, that house, or whichever. And when they do find the victim alive, the overwhelming relief, and so much more faith is then now bestowed again, among the spiritual and psychic community, about, our abilities, about our, just overall gift that we have to speak to a person's energy, and use our abilities in things other than just tarot cards and just readings about love and relationships and stuff like that your energy speaks to you, even in a crisis, that even when you are not doing your best, when you are unable to use your physical body to speak or signal, that the energy around you and energy you've left behind, either in your photograph, because everything is intention, right? I do tell clients to when they take photographs, to have an intention involved. And, one of the intentions is like, find me. So when the picture then snaps with the light and the energy then says, find me. So if for any reason they find themselves in a position that they cannot speak, that energy will still be left on that photograph. Just a little witchy tip that I wanted to throw out there, that I've been given to a lot of my clients. It definitely comes handy in a psychic investigation. We don't ever know if that's ever going to happen to us. That's why it is so very important that I do tell a lot of my clients, the things that do have a lot of energy on them, to keep them safe. It could be an outfit you wear, it could be a piece of jewelry, it could be anything that has a lot of energy on it, to always keep it safe. It's very good for us to educate our family and people that we live with, even our children, that, this has a lot of energy on it, and if case, so and so needs to be found, we can, have that to find them. I know that sounds silly, but the accuracy is just mind-blowing. It's mind-blowing. So I mean, you will always have that. And even for haunting investigations as well, once the item or remains are found of that spirit, the release, the relief, the closure, in the just overall peace that they find in that. That's what psychic investigators are offering, peace. The return of a loved one, the final conclusion of a loved one, and the final resting and, crossing over of a spirit. That's really what they are delivering. So just to give you, both sides. I know I didn't talk about, spirits very much in particular, but I thought it was, just a good general idea of psychic investigators and, their real place and, how much respect that they get overall. So this will be the last episode in our paranormal series for 2022, because I am now going to be moving to other subjects, moving up the line, getting higher in our vibration. So I do believe we have completed, I guess, the lowest part of our vibration, talking about the paranormal and the dead, and the different categories of that, and the understanding of death energy passing on, and then investigating us passing on. So that's it for the series and the episode. I really hope you enjoyed that. Please comment below. Please give your input. Please share as much as possible. If you feel as though this, if you agree with this, and, share if you don't agree with this. What is your take on this? What are your experiences with this? I'm always interested in hearing that type of stuff. So this is Christina with Karma's Eye Psychic LLC in our Universal Spirit podcast. Thank you for listening, and tune in for next week for another episode of whatever our next topic is going to be. All right, lovies. Bye.